before we get started. If we have an emergency evacuation tonight, fire exits at this side and this side of the stage, and you can also use the back doors. There's an assembly point across the road, but if you just pay attention to the steward, it should be all be fine. Anyway, without any further ado, please welcome Samantha, Shannon, and Sarah J Maas.
I can't really see any of you beyond here. The light. There's so much light, and I'm used to dwelling in darkness all the time. But thank you guys so much for coming. It's so good to be back in London with my amazing friend Samantha. Oh my God, I'm so happy right now.
Yes, good evening everyone, and there are so many of you. I'm Samantha Shannon, I'm the author of the Bone Season series, but I'm not here to talk about myself today. I'm here to talk about my wonderful fellow Bloomsbury author. She is the New York Times bestseller, she's the author of 10 books, and she's loved by millions of readers all over the world. It's Sarah J Maas.
Just too embarrassing.
Okay, so we are here to talk about Tower of Dawn, which is the 6th installment in the Throne of Glass series. So I just thought I'd start off by asking Sarah how Tower of Dawn came about. So it was originally designed as a novella, and then it suddenly became a very big book. So how did this happen?
A novella, LOL. So it was supposed to be a novella for years and years, and Tower of Dawn, get out. I think it happened in my last
Yeah, it did.
And it was actually, sorry, no flash photography and no phones. I should have said that at the beginning. But that, literally is my last London event. Someone's phone rang, and I told them to get out. And it turned out it was my father-in-law. Did he get out? Yes, he did. It was a very awkward family dinner after that. So Tower of Dawn was a story that I had in the back of my mind for years, and I kind of knew that I wanted it to be Chaol's story, but also this chance to explore the southern continent. And I knew, in many books before, what I wanted to do with Chaol in this particular story. And I'm so excited to write this book. It was so hard when Queen of Shadows came out, and then Empire of Storms came out, and everyone was like, she hates Chaol, she's the worst person ever. And I was like, no, you don't understand, there are things that are going to happen that I've had planned for so long. Please don't abandon me yet. And when I finally sat down to write Tower of Dawn, just a little bit over a year ago, I sat down one afternoon, I was super pumped to write it, and again, it was supposed to be a novella. And for those of you who don't know, the average novella is between 20 and 30,000 words long, which is probably around 100 pages, roughly, in a Word document. And at the end of the first day, I was on chapter 2, and I'd written 20,000 words. I wrote 20,000 words in one day, and I was just getting started with this story, and I had this oh crap, this is happening moment. And at the end of the week, I had a 100,000 word completed manuscript. And I had to make a very awkward call to my agent and be like, so this novella is actually going to be a real installment in the series. And when I wrote this book, it was this magic frenzy where I couldn't stop writing. I would go to bed excited to wake up the next morning and to write, and I just I couldn't even sit still at times when I was writing because I was just so pumped, and there were so many things that, again, I've been planning for a while, not just with Chaol, but with other characters like Irene, that finally kind of came together, and I live for moments like that when I'm writing, and this book just kind of poured out of me. And then over the next 9 months that I worked on it, the book doubled in size to around 200,000 words. Don't let this US version deceive you, by the way. This is the version with, I call them the Bible pages, because they're super, super thin. You can't even tell, but if you have this copy, you'll understand these pages are ridiculously thin, because if they were normal size pages, it would be your copy here in the UK, where it's like a brick. You could like throw it at someone's head and break their skull. But yeah, so Tower of Dawn was kind of this project that was a passion project in so many ways, and I just fell so wildly in love with the characters that were not only already in the series, but then the new ones that came on board. And this coming May, I've actually got a ACOTAR novella coming out. It isn't, okay, it's not a full-length book. I will tell you now. Okay, so it's called A Court of Frost and Starlight. So it's going to be, it's like a novelette, which no one ever uses that term, but it's not a novella. It's not a full-length novel. I'm very proud of myself that I actually kind of stuck to what I had planned. But that project, it's actually better suited to be on the shorter side of things. And I mean, like, by shorter, I mean this project is the length of like an average book, where it's like 65,000 words instead of like 20,000 words. But that A Court of Frost and Starlight, ACOFAS, I guess. ACOFAS, is that how I would say it if I was in the UK? ACOFAS. So that it's kind of a stepping stone between the original trilogy and the upcoming spin-off novel. So it'll have Farah and Reese both narrating. That was a fun thing, being in Reese's head for a good portion of this book. And then some other characters who you guys already know also have points of view in this project. So we'll kind of set up for a lot of what's to come in the upcoming books. But long story short, I'm very proud of myself for not writing another 200,000 word novel instead of a novella. But yeah, so Tower of Dawn was this kind of like freak project that happened. But now I see it as a full-length like installment in the Throne of Glass series, and its timeline is parallel to Empire of Storms. If you guys have read Tower of Dawn, also if you haven't read it yet, this is a spoiler-free zone. People who spoil things are the devil. I would never do that to you guys, okay? So I will spoil things through Empire of Storms, but I won't spoil Tower of Dawn. But Tower of Dawn and Empire of Storms are parallel to each other, so the timelines all kind of match up. Though I think Tower of Dawn does kind of go a little bit, the last like bit of Tower of Dawn extends kind of past Empire in the future a little bit by a couple weeks. But yeah, so now we've got like a full-length book, like an extra book. Surprise!
I think we're all very glad we have this full-length book. This has been my favourite instalment in the Throne of Glass series. I absolutely loved it.
Thank you.
No worries. So this is not just narrated by Kale. This one, it's also narrated by Nesrin and Irene. Which kind of, I don't want to say which was your favourite, because I know that's really hard when you're writing characters. But what were your favourite elements of each of their three stories? Because they are obviously interwoven, but they each have a different thing going on.
Yeah, I mean, Nesrin's become one of my favorite characters in the entire series, and with her, her storyline, again, no spoilers, but she kind of had the most high fantasy, like adventure type storyline with a bit of like some romance thrown in. But like I got to like really like epic fantasy with her, and I just got so pumped while writing some of her stuff, and then seeing the Southern Continent through her eyes as someone whose father came there. I got to explore and show like a whole different side of the continent, like versus like what Kale would see or what Irene would see. And Nesrin gets to go to some really cool places in the Southern Continent that I just like. I'm such a nerd. Like I just get so amped when I'm like, oh my god, like giant spiders. It's like I'm like constantly in a state of like fangirling over like my own like crap, which is just I'm such a nerd. Oh my god.
You have to be a nerd to write fantasy.
Yeah, I think you really like you gotta get excited by like the little things. I think. And then for Irene, Irene was a character that she's introduced in The Assassin's Blade. It's actually a short story, not even a full-length novella. It's the shortest thing I've ever written. But she was introduced in this short story called The Assassin and the Healer. And that story takes place with Selena at the time, when Selena's on her way to the Red Desert. between the assassin and the pirate lord and the assassin in the desert. And Selena stops at this like really dingy tavern on her way to the Red Desert, as one does. And she meets Irene, who is working as barmaid at the tavern, and they have this kind of chance encounter. And Irene is a healer who's supposed to be a great healer and came from a long line of healers, but the awful things in the Empire happened. And life got hard, and so she wound up working as a barmaid. She and Aelin kind of have this. Aelin. So I have to call her Aelin now. I can't call her Selena anymore. But they have this kind of chance encounter that kind of. I set things up in that book that I wanted to come back in this story.
So you always knew that she was going to.
I always knew that Irene would come back and what I wanted to do with her, and it's been so hard to like wait for her to come back. Because I loved Irene. Like I loved Irene from when I wrote her in the Assassin's Play, but then like when I actually got to write her in Tower of Dawn, from like the very first lines of her first chapter, like her voice just kind of. It like when the characters come into your head, they're not like it's not like I'm like who's this person? I'm gonna invent this person. They just kind of appear, and like you hear them, and you start like channeling them as you write. And I just heard Irene's voice as if I turned a switch on a radio, and there she was, and she just talked. And there's something about her strength and her courage that's it's not like Aelin or even Manon where they just like beat the shit out of people. Like Irene's strength is very different from theirs, and it's it's a quieter strength, but it's also a take no shit kind of strength. And I loved writing her, and I loved and there was something also soothing about her voice, which I know doesn't sound very exciting, but I just I loved every second with Irene. And then with Chaol, Chaol's story in this book, it's a story of, not to sound corny, but it's a story of hope and healing. And that story, I kind of see Chaol's journey in Tower of Dawn as almost a parallel to Aelin's journey in Heir of Fire. He starts off at a very, very low point emotionally. And as much as the physical healing plays a part in this book, it's really about the emotional healing and the emotional growth that he goes through, and the breakthroughs that he has as a human being, the stuff that I set up and been planning for a while. I cried through so much of this book. But when I wrote Empire of Storms, I debated for a good while about whether or not I should add Chaol's journey, basically into Empire of Storms, and I realized that it wouldn't even fit, first of all, but to do his story justice, to do him justice as a character, to do justice to the world of the Southern Continent, I couldn't have squeezed it into that book. Though you just wrote a 300,000 word novel, so it's getting published, so I guess I could.
I think you gave it room to breathe,
Yeah, and I think ultimately, Empire of Storms is kind of it's kind of like the Empire Strikes Back of the series, where everything went to shit. Everyone's miserable, everyone's suffering, and Tower of Dawn is not that story at all. Tower of Dawn, I think, at its heart, is a story of hope and healing, and that wouldn't have fit tone-wise within Empire, and I just wouldn't be able to have done that story justice and have told it in the way I needed to, if it hadn't been its own project. So I love Chaol's story in this book. Just I walk all the paths that my characters go. I'm a very emotional writer, in case you couldn't tell. I get really into my characters' heads, and everything that they go through, I go through it alongside them. So I went on this journey with Chaol, and I definitely, at his lowest point, I was right there with him, and I kind of walked with him out of that. And it was this book just broke me, healed me, and it just was a very emotional book for me to write, and I loved every second of it, not just with Chaol, but with all of them.
It was very emotional for us all to read, I think, when we read So let's just focus on Chaol a little bit more for a moment. So he's gravely injured in Queen of Shadows, and in this book he's working through a lot of painful emotions and memories, and he's also healing physically. So how did you go about researching this to kind of do his story justice?
Right, so Chaol's got an injury to his spine, and it's going to be hard to talk about this without spoiling things again, but Kale's in a wheelchair for this book, and I knew from the start that I wanted to approach his story respectfully. I wanted to do research, and I did research on spinal injuries. I looked at a lot of, in the States we have the Wounded Warrior Project. I don't know if you guys have that here for like veterans who come home who are injured. Like I read a lot of stories about people in the Army, the Marines who were injured, had major injuries and were told they would never walk again, and then through years of therapy and their own will and drive, they were able to do it. About medical breakthroughs with brain implants that they're putting into monkeys. That's not in the book, by the way. But I wanted to do as much research as possible. But then I also had several sensitivity readers read it. People who were in wheelchairs themselves to weigh in and give me their own views. And I learned so much just about a lot of my own internalized horrible phrasings. Do you ever use the phrase stuck in a wheelchair? I feel like people in the States we have that all the time. There's that poor person stuck in a wheelchair. And I saw a really funny YouTube video when I was researching where this woman who's a wheelchair user, she said, "Stuck in a wheelchair is the stupidest phrase of all time, because this is a person who is stuck in a wheelchair." And she showed someone who sat on a pile of glue and they were literally stuck in a chair. It's I am not stuck in this chair. I can move from this chair. I can be mobile in the world. But so I really wanted to try and make his story, even though it's a fantasy, I wanted to make it as accurate in some ways as possible when it came to being in a wheelchair. And then with his healing, I didn't want it to fall into the trope of the magical, wave a wand and he can walk again, because it's not, people who, who might not be as able, and they're not any less human. We are all human. We all have our own stories that are worthy of telling. So that was one of the points that I really wanted to hammer home, was Kale coming to grips with his injury, but also realizing, and this is a little bit of a spoiler, but he's no less of a person, no less of a man, and no less of a warrior, whether he's standing or sitting, no matter how he moves through the world, it doesn't change who he is inside. So that was something I worked hard on, and I really owe a lot to my amazing sensitivity readers, who are just lovely people who just kind of read through it and were great resources to have.
Let's stick to the research side of things. So the world building in Tower of Dawn is quite different from the world building in the other books, because we're in the northern continent, the other books. Southern continent is quite different. It seems to me like it was quite strongly based on the Mongol Empire. What was your research process like for that?
Well, I knew for years now that the southern continent would have that Mongolian Empire, Genghis Khan, type vibe. But it wasn't until I actually started writing this that I began obsessively researching all of these things. And this is not a historical fantasy novel by any means, but I just was fascinated. I've always been fascinated by Genghis Khan, so I thought I could do some research. I became the biggest Genghis Khan fangirl of all time. At all of my events, I can always tell when the audience starts being oh God, please don't give us a history lecture about Genghis Khan. But I learned some really, really cool things about Genghis Khan and what he did with his empire that really blew my mind and inspired a good portion of this book. I will spare you the hour-long lecture, but I will tell you some cool things. So, Genghis Khan and his empire, they had almost near universal education. So in his empire, you were entitled to an education regardless of your class or your religion. You could receive an education for free. He also had a policy of religious tolerance. So regardless of what religion you practiced, you were allowed to practice that within his empire without fear of persecution. And he used that to his advantage when he was conquering all these kingdoms and territories, because he found many willing spies in those countries that he wanted to conquer, where they had been persecuted for their religious beliefs, and they were well, fuck the king, I want to go to Genghis Khan, and practice my religion freely. So he was very smart about that. Also, they invented paper money. Who knew? So we have this real misconception in the West that Genghis Khan and his empire were a bunch of barbarians, and that's not the case at all. They were centuries ahead of their time. they were just a very open, like the war element definitely, that can't downplay that, but they were way ahead of their time. And we have this misconception because Genghis Khan and his armies actually, they reached the fringes of Europe and they slaughtered all the lords, and then they kind of looked at Europe back then and they're like, wow, this is kind of like a shithole. Cause there was, it was kind of like depressing and muddy and bleak. And compared to the wealth of a lot of the territories that they had already swept, there was none of that in Europe. They really didn't have that many resources or anything culturally to offer them. So they basically were like, you know what, we're good. We're gonna pull back the borders. But because all these lords and knights and armies had been slaughtered, the Europeans were a little butthurt that this had happened. So they basically, and because the Western historians have written for the majority of history, their version of history, and that's been accepted as fact. They portrayed Genghis Khan and the Mongolian Empire as barbarians, and that was not the case at all. And that is all I will say about Genghis Khan, I promise you. But so with the Southern Continent, those were some of the things that, I did not, the Europeans being butthurt is not in this book, but the universal education, the right to practice your beliefs regardless of what you believe in, those were all things that wound up kind of in this book in another shape or form, along with some of the names, but again, this is not historical fantasy by any means, so there are bits and pieces of that, there's some touches of ancient Egypt and then the Middle East, and then some just crazy crap that happens in my brain that wound up in there. But writing this book just I don't know, it all kind of just flowed together for the world building. I definitely thought through a lot of it, but some of it just kind of came out and wound up on the page, and I was so excited by it, I couldn't stop writing. I could probably make this book double the length, just talking about cool things within the empire, going into all the food. I tried to dial it down a little bit, so you don't have to read 20 pages about a dessert. I didn't read 20 pages about dessert.
Yeah, I think it really comes through because the details are so they're so meticulous. I love that there's a part about kind of all the healers hanging up their own bells, which is lovely, and you kind of really just populate the world with a lot of detail, which just feels really fresh now. And it's very refreshing after the kind of brutality of Ardalan as well. It just feels really nice to step into a world where everyone's kind of accepted.
I tell people all the time I would never ever want to live in the Throne of Glass world because everyone's miserable and suffering all the time. But I would want to live in the Southern Continent where it's just chill and nice and you don't get bothered. It's just and good food and good clothing. That's where I want to be. Forever.
Yeah. So one other thing that I just absolutely love about the series is just the number of kind of complex female characters who are, you really allow them to kind of go through all emotions that are kind of not considered great for women in society sometimes. So real anger, and not all of them are nice. It's really refreshing to read that. They're kind of portrayed as real people. So are there any women in your life that have inspired you to create these female characters?
I don't know any bloodthirsty witches, unfortunately. Sorry to say. But I was lucky enough to grow up and be raised by women who were just incredible examples of different kinds of strength, and who never told me that I had to put limits on myself and my expectations for my future because I was a girl. They never once said, ladies don't do that. My mom is one of my heroes, and my mom is a badass, and I actually never knew that for a long time. And when I was growing up, I was between you and me, I was a bit of a punk ass bitch. I definitely was very sassy and mouthed off all the time with my mother. And when I was 17, I had a summer break between in the middle of the school year. And so I was never the kid that was allowed to just chill at home during the summer. Like I always had to like go to camp or be in some educational program or have a job. And I had about like 2 free weeks one summer just to like do nothing. And my mom like could not handle that. So she decided I was going to come to work with her. And my mom is a judge in New York City. And so I went to work with my mom, having like, I'd never been to like the courthouse with her before. And let me just say that after seeing my mom behind the bench in her robes, ripping into people, I never bowed off to my mother again. And my mom's a family court judge, so she handles some of the best cases, like adoptions and happy things like that, but then also some of the worst cases, like child abuse, and watching my mom like take down these like motherfuckers who do horrible things to children. You know, I realized like my mom is a badass, and my mom worked her way up from a very, very working class, poor family living in Boston to being a judge in New York, and she definitely was a big influence on me. But another huge influence was actually my grandma, who is probably like my biggest hero ever. And my grandma is my father's mother. She's actually a Holocaust survivor. And she's now about to turn 87 years old. And she was born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1930 to a pretty well-off Jewish family. They were very comfortable. She had 2 wonderful parents, a little brother, and life was happy for them for a while. But being Jews in Germany in the 1930s, things started to get not so good. And it started off with small things, but you know, like the stars on the coats, but then it began to get worse. Like my grandma walked home from school one day and a group of children, German children, surrounded her, and they stoned her. They all had stones in their hands and they threw them at her, and one of them hit her in the head and knocked her out, and she doesn't remember anything after that. And after that incident, my great-grandfather decided that he was going to take a lot of their valuables, jewelry, art, they had a very expensive collection of cameras, and he was going to disperse them to their friends across Europe into hiding, and he was going to take the rest of their assets and liquidate them and purchase tickets for him, like him and his wife, my grandma and her brother, and then his wife's parents were living in Poland. And get them tickets on a boat to England to get out of Germany. And this was before the borders had closed. So he got the tickets, and then it turned out that my great-grandmother's parents in Poland didn't want to leave because they had a very successful textile factory back in Poland, and that things hadn't gotten so bad for them there yet. They wanted to stay. They didn't think things would get worse. They didn't want to leave their factory and their life and their generations of family around them. And my great-grandmother didn't want to leave if it meant leaving her parents behind either. So they didn't get on the boat to England. They stayed in Germany. And not too long after that, Kristallnacht happened. And my grandma still remembers that night when a bunch of the Gestapo broke into their house. She remembers the guys in their giant trench coats with their machine guns, and she remembers them taking my great-grandfather away, and they didn't see him again after that. And it was after that night that my great-grandmother realized that her children were in danger. My grandmother and her little brother were in grave danger, and that she had to get them out of Germany, no matter what. So my great-grandmother made this incredible choice to put her children into the arms of strangers. And she got my grandmother and her little brother into an organization that was smuggling Jewish children out of Germany and put them on a train. And I can't even imagine making that choice, like to put my children, like literally into the unknown, but just to get them to safety, to get them away. And so she put my grandma and her little brother onto a train, said goodbye to them, and then she went back to Poland to be with her parents. And from that point on, my grandma and her little brother, they were actually separated very quickly. And my grandma was kind of hidden in churches and people's basements and schools, and she was kind of hidden all across Europe. And she wound up with a family in Brussels. And this family had a little boy around her age, and they treated her like she was their daughter. And she stayed with them for a while. And then when the Nazis invaded Belgium, they took her with them when they evacuated. And when they evacuated Brussels, everyone left. And the highway coming out of the city was just gridlock. And my grandma remembers, she still remembers the Nazi planes flying overhead and shooting at the people on the highway. And it didn't matter if they were Jewish or Christian or whatever they were, the Nazi planes flew overhead and shot at anyone that was on the highway. So they had to hide in ditches. They had to wait until night had fallen and then push their car. And along that journey, the family realized that my grandma being Jewish meant that she could get them killed and it could get their son killed. And my grandma understood that as well. So they made the very hard decision to put her back into this organization and to put her back into hiding. And my grandma doesn't hold that against them at all. She believes that was the right choice because it would have gotten them, if they had been found hiding a Jewish child, they would have all been killed. And she loved them as if they were her own family. And from there on, my grandma was hidden again, and she wound up in a castle in the south of France with a bunch of other Jewish children who were told that they were actually getting onto boats out of Europe to go to England, to go to America. And my grandmother was told she was being put on one of the very, very last boats to America. And she said to them, "I'm not going." And they said, "Yeah, you are." And she said, "No, I'm not going. I'm not going without my brother." And they said, "We don't know where your brother is. He could be dead. We have no record of where he wound up." And my grandma said, "Look for him. I am not going unless you find him." And so the social worker, she decided to just humor my grandmother, and she looked. And they found my grandma's little brother hiding in a church just a couple miles down the road. You can't make this up. And so they were able to get him onto the boat with my grandma. And they wound up going to America, where they were placed with a Jewish home, a nice Jewish family in upstate New York. And they spent a couple years there, living as American teenagers and growing up. And my grandma has said that it wasn't until that when she was on that boat to America, it wasn't until she sailed into New York Harbor and she saw the Statue of Liberty that she knew that she was safe and that she and her brother were safe. And they loved being Americans. And they had no idea what happened to their parents until well after the war ended, when they found out that their father was alive. And my great-grandfather survived the concentration camps. He was in Auschwitz, and then he got transferred to Buchenwald. And it took him a long time to find my grandma and her little brother, because after Buchenwald was liberated, he stayed at the camp. And while he was in the concentration camp, he and a rabbi became very close. And right under the Nazi Guard's noses, they actually continued to practice their Judaism. They had Shabbat every Friday night, they had Hanukkah, they had Passover. And after the camp was liberated, he and the rabbi stayed because they discovered that there was a large number of young adults who were technically too old to receive the aid that a lot of the Jewish children were receiving at the camps. But they were still children. They were people who had no family left, and they were still kids. And he and the rabbi stayed at the camp and forged documents for all of those young adults, saying that they were younger than they actually were, so that they could receive the aid that they needed. And they stayed until every last one of those kids got the help they needed. And then he went to find out what happened to his own family. And so my great-grandfather, he found out what happened to his wife first. And so my great-grandmother, she went back to her parents in Poland, where they had their textile factory. And when the Nazis took over Poland, they decided that they would let my great-grandmother's parents keep their factory and keep running the textile factories to make uniforms for the Nazi guards. While they were doing that, my great-grandmother and her parents were hiding Jews in the factory, and the Nazis found out and murdered all of them. So that entire side of the family is just gone. But he did find out that his 2 children were alive and they made it to America. So he went and he found my grandma and her little brother again. And they had become American teenagers by that point. But he was able to reconnect with them, and they wound up actually staying with the Jewish family that took them in, because he eventually remarried, and they wanted to stay in Rochester, New York. So he kind of shuttled between Rochester and Florida and kind of moved all around just to stay in touch with them. But they have, this story, if it was in a movie, you'd be like, this would never ever happen. But my grandmother's story, it's my story. It's one that I'm honored to be able to tell people. And my grandma is an immigrant, and I am the granddaughter of an immigrant, and I am proud of that fact. And these books that you guys read and you love, they would not exist. These books would never have existed if people who had no reason to step up hadn't done so. If people, regardless of their faith, whether they were Jewish or Christian, they decided they were going to help a child who had no connection to them. None of this would exist without those people standing up when they were asked to. And it kills my grandma because she can't remember the name of that family in Brussels who helped them. And she went back to Europe, I think a couple decades ago, to try and find them. But this was kind of before the age of the internet, and so she can't remember their names really, or even the street where their house was. But she feels that she still owes them a debt. And I feel that even as her granddaughter, I kind of owe those good people a debt to just tell their story, and tell my family's story. And Tower of Dawn is actually dedicated to my grandma. And there was no one else that this book could have been dedicated to. And I see some of Irene's story kind of tied to my grandma's story. And Irene is not my grandma by any means, but there are bits and pieces of her in there. There's a point in Tower of Dawn, and this is not really a spoiler, where Irene feels this moment of connection to the women who have come before her ancestors who have come before her. And one of those women, I gave one of them my great-grandmother's name. And so I'm there are bits of my family's story kind of in here, not really in a factual way, just in the emotions of things. And Irene is an immigrant who's living in a kingdom that welcomed her there and wanted her there. And so I think my grandma's my favorite person in the whole wide world. And not just because of this amazing story, but because she's now 87 years old. And if you ever meet her, she is this tiny little lady. She's pocket size, but she just has this love of life and this energy and this curiosity. And I'm not even bullshitting you guys. She would want to know each and every one of your stories. She just is that curious about the world. So no matter what horrible things she went through when she was young, and she saw the ugliest parts of humanity. It didn't break her. It didn't make her bitter or angry. And my grandma, she grew up and became a 1950s housewife, and she had 4 kids, and once all the kids were grown and off to college, she divorced my grandfather and decided she was going to spend the rest of her life traveling the world, and my grandma has done it. She's 87, and this past year she went to Vietnam for 20 days. She's about to go to the Galapagos in the Amazon for the 2nd time. If you name a place on Earth, she has been there, and she has no intention of slowing down. She wants to see everything, learn everything about anything ever. And I was given that by my grandma, that interest in the world and the love of travel and the love of meeting new people, and to live my life with my eyes open and my heart open. So I owed so much of like who I am to my grandma. And I wish I could like bring her on tour with me, so like at this moment I could be like, and here she is, and she could like pop out of a cake or something. She'd be game for that, by the way. Like she's like the best. I just love her, and she's a huge inspiration for me, just like as a human being and as a woman. And I can only hope that when I'm 87 years old, I still signing up for trips. She goes around like this like old person's travel group. She goes by herself, and she likes going on these trips where she knows no one. She likes meeting new people. But like I kind of want to go on one of these like old person trips with her, because like I'm basically a 90-year-old woman on the inside, and like 5 o'clock dinner, 7 o'clock bedtime. Like yes.
Well, your grandmother sounds like an incredible woman, and she said it was an honour to tell us that story, but I think it was really an honour to hear it as well. So I'm going to do my found out about the incredible journey, and that's all my Q&A questions done. But I have some Q&A questions for you guys as well. Some of them are quite funny, and some of them are quite detailed. In fact, I'm going to get to my favourite one, because one of them was just so incredible. I laughed so hard. Where is it? Oh yeah. Why does Aileen dislike fish so much? What happened that made her hate it?
Alright, I just love this question. Very, very rarely do I give like bits and pieces of myself to my characters. Like I am not Aylin, I am not Farah, I am not Manon, but they do get bits and pieces of me in there. And when I began writing for the class, I hated fish. Like I hated it. Like I couldn't even stand. If my parents made salmon, I would take my meal in my room because I couldn't stand. And like I'm a Pisces, so I was like, it's cannibalism. I was a very strange child. So for a while I would eat fish, and then right around when I wrote Air and Fire, I began trying it, realizing I actually loved it. And so like there's actually like when Aylin starts to eat, I think like where she is it like Air and Fire or Queen of Shadows, like Aylin starts to eat fish and realizes that she likes it, and so our journeys mirror. And now like sushi is actually my favorite food. Like I would literally just eat a pound of like raw tuna if I could. That's been my journey, my personal journey, you guys. So that's where it came from. Aylin and I now are big fans of fish. So I still can't. I'll eat raw salmon. I love raw salmon. But cooked salmon, like I will throw it. I will projectile vomit if I even like smell it. So that's still off limits for me.
For you and Aileen?
But yes.
Okay, maybe serve her salmon. Yeah, that whole house will get down. Let's sort of relevant to your grandmother's journey. You said that she's a really big traveller. What's the one place in the world that you most want to visit? Because it seems like you visit a lot of places on book tour.
Yeah,
have you not gone yet that you'd love to go?
I kind of want to know your answer to that, because you've been like everywhere.
Oh man, I'd love to go to Venice actually. I've never gone to Venice. I've been to a lot of places in Italy, but it's kind of and also Iceland. On my bucket list. There's one thing left on my bucket list. I'm 26. I've got one thing left. And it's to see the Northern Lights. That's my last thing.
Wow.
So Iceland is.
Yeah, Iceland's on my list too. I went to the Isle of Skye in Scotland a couple of years ago, and I was told that like the landscapes are similar, and the sky was so magical that I was like, sign me up for Iceland immediately. I'd love to go to Patagonia. I love mountains. I'm like an indoor cat, but I like to see the outdoors. I like to camp or like be wet and dirty, but I like to do like glamping, I guess. I like to go to places where I either feel like very much like wired into all of humanity and like a part of the hustle and bustle, or I like to go to places where I feel like I'm the only person on earth and I can just like feel, it sounds so corny, but like grounded and like with nature and kind of like get back to like myself. So Patagonia, I feel like would be one of those trips where I'm just like running around with my arms out, like feeling the mountain breeze. Mongolia, like I've wanted to go to Mongolia my entire life, and then especially after writing this book, that's really, really high on my list.
It's amazing when you've been researching a place and you finally get to go there. Like I've been researching Japan quite extensively for my next book, and when I actually went there, it's just the most incredible feeling.
I'm so jealous. Japan's high on my list. Like,
it's great.
Sushi.
The pinnacle of character development, you can go to Japan and eat the sushi. Also, kind of travel themed. I've been really curious about this. What accents do the characters have? Because for me, I'm picturing Rowan with a Scottish accent. I don't quite know. Maybe I just like a Scottish accent.
Okay. So in my head, like everyone just has that Lord of the Rings accent, where it's like not British, not like American. It's just kind of like that, like pretty like.
I feel like the accent, like when people who don't realise that there are multiple accents in Britain, they say it's a British accent.
Yeah,
that's the accent.
Well, like in my head, that's what I hear. But then I like to tell you guys, like whatever accent you imagine is the hottest possible accent, that's what the characters have.
So they all have a Scottish accent.
Yes.
That is my favourite piece of news I've ever received. Okay, I like how these questions, they flow very thematically. Thank you for this. I know you guys are already separately. But while we're on the subject of hot accents and hot people in general, will you ever write the wedding scenes in any of your books? You kind of wrote one in Alcohol. Kind of went not so well.
Yeah, so, alright. Okay, so when I was in high school, when we first read Pride and Prejudice in high school, my teacher told me this factoid that Jane Austen never actually wrote a wedding scene for any of her books. And I implanted itself in my mind as a thing. And then I actually did try, so in ACOTAR, I did write this wedding scene in an earlier draft, and it was so fucking cheesy. It was just it was so corny, and not even in a good way. I was writing it, and I was I can't. I know, they're, you know what, don't take my word for this, but right now, I have plans for one of the upcoming spin-off novels for ACOTAR. There may or may not be a wedding scene in that. But if it's really cheesy when I write it,
even when it's cheesy.
But I really kind of like the idea. It's just it's one of those things. Jane Austen never wrote an actual wedding scene, and I'm pretty sure that's I've not actually gone through and read the endings of all her books, but pretty sure that's true, and I'm gonna pretend it's true because can you imagine the Elizabeth? I would love to see the Elizabeth Darcy sweet wedding moment. But at the same time, they kind of
shows
in the actual books, I don't think there's actually a wedding scene. I just thought, if Jane Austen did it, I'm gonna do it. Not that we're there's Jane Austen and then me.
I think you're in slightly different genre. Okay, also on the subject of weddings and being married, did your husband inspire you for any of your characters? The question is, please say he is your Reese. Please say that's how you pronounce it.
Yeah. No. I don't know how this
Sarah's husband is here, by the way.
Yeah, I don't know where he is. I don't know how this rumor started that my husband, I based Reese off of my husband. I saw a text post once, on my Instagram that popped up. I was LOL, I know you guys are laughing that Sarah J Maas modeled Reese after her husband, but I think it's sweet. And I was wait, what? People are laughing at me? No, it's not true. I never said that. The only things that they have in common are they're tall and they have dark hair. They are not the same person at all. So I think he would love it if I was yeah, I totally modeled Reese after him. No, if anything, again, queen of cheesiness, but with Farrah and Reese's relationship, that's it's true love, that relationship, and I was only able to really write about that and know about how transformative and life-changing that is because I have that in my real life. With my husband. Actually, with the a partner who respects me and encourages me and supports me. Take his shirt off, it would just be like pasty skin. No, he has no please. Last night, at my Eventbrite, and last night I told the audience this story about this t-shirt, this amazing t-shirt I saw at one of my US events, like in September, and this girl came up to my signing table, and she was around like 13 years old, I want to say, and she had a shirt that said, "It's all about the wingspan." Oh my god, this shirt is fucking amazing. And she was like, "Let me show you the back." And she turned around, and on the back was a pair of wings, and underneath it was a ruler.
Just in case we didn't get it.
I was like, "Does your mother know?" Like, and she's like, "No." She doesn't know what it means. She's like, her mother had no idea.
She's thinking like, "Oh, you know, I thought it was lots of fairies." Wow. Okay, I've only got time to ask one more, and I'm going to selfishly choose the one that I want to know, which is, will we meet the Ithaca family, Nehemiah's family?
Ooh. But we can yeah, so Nehemiah's family will make an appearance in the last glass book. Yeah, they were in Empire of Storms originally, along with a bunch of other characters. Like Ravi and Soul. I think we had a question about them earlier.
Yeah, the other one is Ravi and Soul.
Yeah, so they were in it. Knox was in it. But Empire of Storms. Like, why? Why is Knox a thing? Like, in every film people want to know about him. Like, just he was he was in Throne of Glass for like 3 pages. He was like a moderately hot thief. Like, he was. I know, like, there's so many hot men. You guys picked like the most average ones. But so he was in Empire, but like my editor very wisely pointed out that Empire was kind of the book of like reunions and like meetings, and it was a little much at that point. Like, so that every other chapter was like, and this character just showed up in the past, so it was a little redundant. So I had to make some brutal choices in the set, and actually it really worked out, where I was able to really figure out, like, for the last book, like when I want to bring in like each character for the most impact. So Nehemiah's family, they'll be in it. Ravi and Soul will be in it, and then Knox will be in it. We'll find out what he's been up to.
Thank God Knox will be in it.
I'm in the middle of rereading the Throne of Glass books just as like mental and like emotional preparation for working on the final one, and this is my first time actually rereading them as published books, because I have had a policy of never reading a book once it's published, because I'm scared that I'll like find like something in there and be like, that's so fucking stupid. Thankfully I'm about to start Queen of Shadows, and thankfully I have not had any moments like that, but I just reread Throne of Glass for the first time in like a million years, and like, yeah, like Knox was like cool, but like I was like the whole time that he was on the page, I was like, why are like my readers so fixated on this man? Like,
maybe it's because he was on the page for like seconds. He was like, tell me his backstory.
I mean, like, he and Aelin definitely had like chemistry, where I was like, I could write some fanfic about this. I love you guys. You're weird like me. Like, one random character becomes like the ultimate ship. Love it.
Well, I think we can all agree that we're all massively looking forward to the next book in the series, the final book in the series. I'm feeling very emotional about this.
Me too.
I'm just going to finish off and just, would you like to say anything to your massive audience?
Well, beyond thanking you guys for being here tonight, I also wanted to thank you just for like being an amazing group of people. Some of you might know this, but in case you didn't, my dad had like a really, really massive heart attack this summer, and it was like a really, really, really bad heart attack. His survival chances were at like about 5%. That's how bad it was. So I wanted to thank you guys for like your messages of support and like your prayers and your positive vibes. My dad's doing so much better now. Like physically, like he's fine now. But when it happened, when the heart attack happened, my dad wasn't breathing for about 20 minutes, which is not good for your brain. And about probably 2 days after the heart attack, my dad was in a coma, and the neurologist came into the ICU room and told us that based on the brain scans, like the brain waves that he was seeing, it looked like there wasn't really any reason to expect that my dad either would come out of the coma or have any sort of meaningful existence. And since then, my dad has proved every doctor and scientist wrong. My dad's a lawyer. He's now back at work. We didn't see that coming. But it was a really it was a pretty brutal summer. And I can't even tell you like how much it meant to me to know that you guys were rooting for all of us, and how much it meant to my family. My family are such nerds. Like they totally go on my Instagram all the time just to like see what you guys are saying. And they read through like every single one of like not just like my mom, but like my entire family went and saw like all your messages of support and love, and they're so grateful that you guys were so kind, and I can't even convey how grateful I am and how much it means to me to not to just like have you as readers, but also as friends, and you're just like the greatest group of people. And I don't know if I would have really gotten through portions of this summer and fall without you guys. And I do believe in the power of positive thinking and positive energy. Maybe the fact that my dad is already back at work is because of you guys sending out all those positive vibes. So I wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart for just being like wonderful people. And this past year hasn't been all bad news. I wanted to wait until tonight to tell you guys this because London's one of my favorite places in the world. But I am actually pregnant. I'm due on May 21st, so I'll have a book baby coming out in May, and a real baby coming out. And we found out just a couple days ago that we're having a baby boy. We went to Harrods like 2 days ago, and I bought my first piece of baby clothing, and it's actually this little blue onesie with a pair of wings on the back. I could not resist the Illyrian reference. But so, when my dad had his heart attack, one of the first things I thought was I wish that he had had a grandkid, but now he'll have one. And we didn't have kids just to appease my parents. We wanted for a long time. So the books will be out on schedule next year. So I'm sure. Don't worry if you're having a baby. Is she ever gonna publish her books ever again? Writing is still very much happening. But I wanted to share that good news with you before I shared it with anyone else because I love being here in London. I wanted you guys to know first. So an exclusive to the London event.
We are very, very honoured to have heard that. Sarah, it's been an absolute privilege to listen to you. Thank you very much for being here. I'm so glad to hear your dad's doing better, and I cannot wait to hear more news about your baby. But can we get a big round of applause?